Hi, my name is Michael McHugh, and this is my presentation for why Trump's wall would be an issue for American citizens. So for reason one, the price of the wall would be very expensive. So amount that taxpayers are giving as of right now. So the wall would cost approximately $21.6 billion, and that's mostly coming from taxpayers as well as stripping from other places in the government. It will drive up the tax rate for American citizens, which is not something that people want to hear, because people always want lower taxes. Compared to NASA's budget, the wall's budget is about $1 billion less, and NASA's annual budget is $22.6 billion, and we all know NASA and how important and big that branch of government is. The wall is, like I said before, the wall is as expensive as one of the biggest organizations run by the government for one whole year. And that's, people have gone to the actual moon and are getting paid have $1 billion less in funding than this wall would have. So Trump's comeback, the bill was proposed to Congress and was shot down. It was not passed. They did not win the 3/4 majority vote, or the 2/3 majority vote. And Trump could try to reintroduce it to Congress again, but it would take a lot of time for that to flow through Congress and get the voting that it would need. So on February 15th of 2019, Trump declared a national emergency from the border. It threatened declaring if Congress would not pass the proposing bill. So he took it and declared a national emergency. So he redirected billions of dollars from government assets and took a lot of taxpayers' money as well and put it towards him building this wall. So he is taking what isn't his. To build a massive wall along the entire border of the U.S. and Mexico, they would need authority to take the land of the people that are living there. So the Fifth Amendment is also known as the taking clause, which allows government to take private land if the government supplies the owner with the compensation at fair market price. This will suck massive amounts of money out of the government, which are needed to build the wall in the first place. And it's an endless cycle of money that does not stay consistent between the people and the government. So for the second reason why it would be an issue, people will find ways around the wall, and they already have. So the evidence is out there. So CNN, we all know what CNN is, but CNN shows several videos of illegal immigrants already attempting to come over the wall that's been built already. There are sections that are built in Texas, and it's shown that people from Mexico are actually jumping the wall already, and they're already getting past it. This shows an imminent threat to border security. So people getting past could lead to innocent people getting hurt, which is the problem with criminal rates and stuff that will immigrants that flow into the country. And this can create a national panic. It could be blown out of proportion way more than it needs to be. This one is drugs into the U.S. The flow of illegal drugs into this country is astounding. Last year, there was $109 billion spent on illegal drugs throughout the entire U.S. And Mexico is a leader in those drugs that inflow into the U.S. through smugglers and cartels that illegally come into the country or legally come into the country. But either way, it just shows that we need more security. And they are the leading smugglers of heroin, marijuana, and cocaine into the U.S. per year. Cartels will find new ways to get the drugs into the U.S. So the industry of drugs in the United States is a huge, huge industry. And now marijuana is becoming more legal and whatnot, but it's still, people need to get their drugs into the U.S. because it's such a big place for people to buy them. It poses a serious health threat for U.S. and could cause deaths from drug overdoses and maybe gang shootouts and stuff like that from just drugs being into the country. So the scheduled construction would take way too long to actually make a serious impact at the moment. So the plan was to start construction in 2017, and it would take 3.5 years to build. He declared a national emergency because it was a threat at that time, and in 3.5 years, it would be left super unsecure for immigrants to just kind of flow in freely, because they have to take down the other wall that was built originally. They'll need huge amounts of border security, and it will cost a ton of money to hire workers for them to actually be brought into the U.S. or for people to be kicked out of the U.S. and keeping that border secure. It was noted that a lower amount of checkpoints would be installed, which is not something great because that leaves open areas to where people aren't really guarding, and it would make less spots to check along the border, which is a good thing hypothetically, but if you really think about it, it just opened gateways for smugglers and other people. So the third reason is it will not stop the immigration crisis. So for immigrants in the U.S. today, in 2018 there was an estimated 10.5 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S., which is a ridiculously high number considering our country's population is around 330 million. So approximately 4.95 million are from Mexico, which is almost half of all undocumented immigrants in this country. So most illegals are smuggling drugs from Mexico, which means that within this half of the population of undocumented immigrants, you have an astounding amount of people from Mexico that are bringing drugs into this country. They are selling them and distributing them, and even with the border security, cartels will still make a way to infiltrate into the U.S. and be able to get their supplies around. So not all undocumented immigrants are members of these drug cartels. So there are people coming to the U.S. to really get a better life than what they have in their home countries. Like let's say they're escaping from a dictator, or they're escaping from poor living conditions, and famine, and stuff like that. But in the large scheme of things, there are a lot of people who are members of this drug cartel and who do bring in drugs into this country. The immigrants are from all over the world, so it's harder to remove them if they're not just a country that's directly connected to the U.S. If they're from, let's say, the Middle East or Russia and they're escaping and they're trying to come here, it's a lot harder to take people out of this country. But Trump and his idealism is to attack the Mexican immigrants because they're so close and just try and blow that up, so it would keep American citizens guessing about whether or not they actually do need the wall. And it would try to swing into their heads that, hey, building this wall would be a good idea without actually presenting the information that would show that why it's so bad. And immigration will always continue to be a problem in the U.S. People still want to live here. This place is awesome for people who are trying to escape their past, but in the grand scheme of things, the Mexican wall is not really going to stop people from coming into the U.S. if immigration is such a problem. Undocumented individuals lowers unemployment. So this is actually a very good thing for the U.S. economy. So undocumented immigrants actually pay around $7 billion to Social Security each year, which is why I found really surprising, because you think of all these people who are illegal immigrants, they don't have actual documentation of their citizenship here, but they're paying $7 billion a year into Social Security, and that keeps money flowing into government really well. These payments allow for, they keep the money flowing through the federal government, which would end up, it creates jobs, and it's just good for the economy because it keeps it fluctuating, it doesn't keep inflation high, and it doesn't deflate at all. So it just keeps a balanced government. It keeps balanced funding to a federal government. So undocumented immigrants actually spend an average of $12 billion in taxes. So this comes from sales tax, excise taxes, and let's say they're being paid as a job, they still have tax tax taken out of their paychecks, which is surprising to me because you think people with no documentation wouldn't really have to pay taxes because there'd be nowhere to pull that from. But people with jobs in the U.S. that are undocumented actually do pay a considerable amount of taxes. And the money flow from these immigrants helps to create new jobs. So when money is put into the government, they're able to take that money and they're able to put it back out into the public for people to use, and it's just a constant flow. So with this new implementation, when undocumented immigrants implement that $7 billion to Social Security and $12 billion in taxes, it cycles more money through, creating more jobs for people like us who live in the U.S. So the last reason would actually be endangering animals and habitats. So you can't touch endangered species, and along the entirety of the border between U.S. and Mexico, there are hundreds of endangered species that live in that kind of area. So by law, people are not allowed to interfere with these endangered species. It was put into effect by President Nixon in 1973 when he enacted the Endangered Species Act, which protects the harm and relocation of endangered species. And if you were to take those endangered species and you were to kill them off as you were building the wall, it would seriously affect the ecosystems, and it would really kind of topple the entirety of that ecosystem. And it's also helpful to recover imperiled animals and plants for this kind of region. So shifting food chains and how it affects the ecosystems. So the food chain is the overall arching main part of an ecosystem, and it's just like the train of life of how the smallest are the prey to the bigger, and the bigger and bigger, and it goes all the way up until humans, because we're at the top of the food chain. So if it is affected, the ecosystem itself can collapse. It would cause like unhabitable living conditions for any person, being, organism, whatever. So in collapsed ecosystems, it cannot hold like sustainable populations of organisms, and that also just goes for us. There could be food shortages and plants dying, and it could really like change the overall atmosphere of a certain area. So if one organism can thrive, it could result in overpopulation. So this is bad for keeping ecosystems balanced, and infestations will occur as a result. So overpopulation is a big problem. Overpopulation of a certain species can result in a massive sway of like pests and things that you don't want living where people are. So pests can lead to property damage for innocent civilians, which is more money that they will have to take out of their pockets as people living in this country to pay off like the damages that would be in their certain area or whatever property they own. And people will have to rely on animal control. Although they are good at what they do, they can't really control entire populations of animals inside a certain region. They would have to resort to other methods such as extermination, and that could seriously harm the environment, because if you have an overpopulation of one type of animal and you kill all of them off, you'll have an overpopulation of another, and it's just an endless cycle like that. So you really can't resort to killing off a bunch of animals. So Trump's wall will negatively impact the people of the United States. That's my thesis. And through heavy expenditures, people being able to get around the wall, the fact that the wall will not stop or slow down the immigration crisis, and the risk of harming endangered species and environments, the wall will hurt people of the U.S. more so than helping them. That's all for this presentation. Thank you for listening.